Hello and welcome to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 5 Countdown video. Today we'll be taking a look at the current Top 5 compositions for patch 11.19. While the patch itself was on the lighter side of changes, keep in mind the 11.18b patch also impacted the meta quite a bit. We're now seeing a shift back towards stage 4 and 5 as the main focus of the meta, with a lot of emphasis on 4-cost carries. That said, the meta is quite diverse with reroll builds, 3-cost carries, and late game capped boards. Let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Starting off our top 5, we have Rangers coming in as the number 5 comp. Rangers are one of the more unique compositions of the patch because there's multiple viable carries. Vayne reroll is doing well, Aphelios is of course a solid option, and late game there's the ever-reliable Akshan transition. But even Ashe 3 is playable, meaning there's at least 4 potential Ranger comps that are viable in the meta. Of course, the most reliable is Aphelios, with a close second being Akshan. Vayne reroll can do well in the mid game, but struggles against late game boards, and Ashe 3 is a niche composition that only does well some of the time. While these variations are both playable, it's unlikely that you'll see them in every lobby, unlike Akshan and Aphelios, where at least one player is always using them. With that in mind, let's focus on Aphelios and Akshan. Of the two, Aphelios is more consistent since a 4-cost carry is much easier to hit than 5-cost. Akshan is also heavily contested by multiple compositions, particularly Sentinel. That means the chance of running Akshan as your carry pivot is quite low. Instead, it's better to focus on playing around Aphelios for more consistent results. As for Aphelios, he's not quite as reliable in the meta as Draven or Lucian. The reason is that an Aphelios board is quite expensive, requiring multiple 4 and 5-cost champions. That's because the cap board for Aphelios runs Aphelios, Akshan, Teemo, Volibear, Ivern, Fiddlesticks, Lulu, and Diana. Gwen is also a viable option, as is Viego, both of which increase the cost of the board. There's a lot of gold investment to be able to do well with an Aphelios board, especially when compared to the other 4-cost carry comps that run a mixture of 3 and 4-cost champions. On the plus side for Aphelios, Rageblade has become all the rage of auto-attack carries in the meta. Draven, Lucian, Aphelios, and even champions like Vayne, Akshan, and Kayle can all use Rageblade effectively. This means you can pivot into or out of Aphelios quite easily, whereas in previous metas it was quite difficult. All in all, Rangers are a staple of the current meta. Let's move on to the composition coming in at number 4, Karma Dawnbringer. There's a healthy mixture of AD and AP comps in the meta now that Karma is viable. That said, it can be difficult to run an effective Karma composition because she is rather item dependent and requires a bit of high rolling to do well in the late game. In general, the best result players usually get with Karma, on average, a 4th or 3rd. Placing higher requires things like Teemo 2, Garen 2, or even Karma 3. The reason for this is that Karma won't always target the champions you want her to, meaning the enemy can survive long enough to clean up your board, and Karma isn't all that great when there's no frontline protecting her. Playing Karma also means committing to AP items either early on in the game or in the mid game. While this isn't inherently an issue, it does limit the transitions that you can make. It's basically Karma, Vel'Koz, and Teemo with the rare Heimerdinger tossed in. As Teemo requires a lot of luck, that doesn't leave players with a lot of options. So if you shoehorn yourself into playing Karma and don't hit, well, it's a bottom 4 for you. Doom and gloom aside, when you are able to hit Karma 2 with a Dawnbringer composition, top 4ing should be easy enough to do. This is because Karma is great at clearing up the majority of the enemies on the board, so even if you lose the round, you take less damage. And Dawnbringer has a ton of really good champions, several of which you can utilize all game long, like Gragas, Riven, and Nidalee. Having those champions early on in the game will save your health, which helps you later on in being able to find Karma 2 and should result in a top 4. Overall, Karma with Dawnbringer is an easy-to-run composition that focuses on placing in the top 4. As far as AP comps go, it's not going to cap as hard as other builds, even AD compositions, but it's certainly competitive in the current meta. Up next, we have Draven Legionnaire coming in at number 3. Finally, after all this time, Draven is a playable carry in the mid set. Okay, that's a bit unfair because at the end of 11.18, Draven was up and coming in the meta. But now at 11.19, Draven is a mainstay in the meta. There's a few reasons for this, but the most obvious reason is that they did a mini rework for him. They made it so that his auto attacks ignore 50% of the target's armor, basically giving him a built-in Last Whisper. While they did have to lower his base damage and ability scaling, the fact is, on average, he's doing more damage now that Last Whisper is no longer a required item. That has made all the difference, as players can now run full damage or damage and utility on Draven without wasting an item slot on Last Whisper. It also opens up the door for better utility items like Rageblade, Runa's Hurricane, and Hand of Justice. Besides items, there's also new positioning tech for Draven when playing against Lucian or Vel'Koz. Basically, if you frontline Draven and have Galio nearby, Draven will be out of harm's way against Lucian and Vel'Koz, while being relatively safe against melee champions because of Galio's taunt. This positioning isn't foolproof, but it does help a lot against Lucian and Vel'Koz, which are normally two comps that Draven struggles against. Thanks to that, Draven has mostly even or even favored odds against most other meta compositions, which has helped push him further into relevance. On now to the way you build and play Draven. The most common is 4 Legionnaire with a wide assortment of other synergies. There's 4 Knights, 4 Forgotten, Ironclad Mystic. It really depends on the lobby and items that you have on Draven. The easiest to run is 4 Legionnaire, 4 Knights because it provides attack speed, healing, and defensive stats for Draven. 4 Forgotten is worth running if your items are low damage and high utility, as the increased AD from the trait helps boost his damage. It's great to finally see Draven being viable in the meta. Moving into the top 2, we have Abomination as the number 2 comp. Abomination continues to be the surest way to play an AP composition, either with Vel'Koz as the main carry or into the later game, Heimerdinger. Teemo is also a viable option, but is difficult to play for anyone who hasn't been high rolling all game since he costs health to buy. Heimerdinger is also a bit high roll centric because you need Heimerdinger 2, good items, and likely a capped level 9 board to finish in the top 2. The consistent way to utilize Abomination is with Vel'Koz. Vel'Koz does require proper positioning, but on average does well against every other meta composition since his damage output is quite high. Slap a Death Cap, Jeweled Gauntlet, and a mana item on him, and Vel'Koz will carry you towards the top 4. As for the Abomination side, defensive items still work best for both the monstrosity and the frontline. Nunu, in particular with a defensive item, should be enough frontline to carry you through the early stages of the game. From there, you want to add in Fiddlesticks as the 4th Abomination, plus Ivern and Volibear if possible. Abomination has some of the best cap late game boards thanks to Revenant, Heimerdinger, and Teemo. Keep in mind that you by no means have to play Vel'Koz with Abomination. Abomination can be transitioned out of even if you have AD items since Callista is a top tier early game item holder. It's easiest to pivot into Aphelios, but any AD carry is fine, just slowly swap out the board at level 7 and 8. But as we've said, if your game plan is to play AP, then Abomination is the way to go. Before we move on, it's worth noting that Draconic overall got better this patch, meaning it is possible to play a Draconic Abomination opening board. Ashe is able to carry, Set was buffed, and in the unlikely case that you hit Udyr 3, he was also buffed. Galio is still a top tier frontline champion, so an early 5 Draconic board can help propel an Abomination board into the late game and potentially hit a quick Heimer 2. All in all, not much has changed with Abomination as it's still one of the most consistent compositions in the current meta. And with that, we can talk about the composition coming in at number 1, Lucian Sentinel. What sets Lucian Sentinel apart from the rest of the meta is consistency. While every comp we've talked about today is capable of placing in the top 4, Lucian is able to top 4 practically every game. Sure, there may be times where Lucian is too contested and you're stuck with a Lucian 1 or have to pivot, but on average, a player running Lucian is more likely to top 4 than if they were to play any other meta composition. This is for a few reasons. 1, most of the meta has shifted towards stage 4 and 5. 3-cost carries are viable as item holders, but there's not as many running around in the late game. Assassins have fallen out of favor, and Thresh was nerfed. All of those changes combined make it so playing front-to-back compositions is the way to go. Lucian is one of the best AD carries for this style of play because he will burn through the enemy frontline quickly and be able to hit the backline much faster than champions like Aphelios or Draven. In addition to that, Lucian comes online much earlier as a level 1 Lucian can still do plenty of damage with items, whereas Draven, Aphelios, or other champions like Akshan and Kayle will struggle before being upgraded. 6 Sentinel is also a strong vertical trait that directly buffs Lucian at the beginning of combat and keeps him alive later on in the fight when he gets low on health. Comparatively, it's much harder to put together an Aphelios board or even a Draven board. There's no reliance on 5-cost champions, and the only 2 4-cost Sentinels you need are Lucian and Galio, both of which do just fine at tier 1. So a 6 Sentinel board with Lucian 1 will outperform pretty much any other comparable composition in stage 4, meaning players get to save health and build up their economy for a better level 8. From there, they can roll at 8, hit their relatively inexpensive upgrades, and play for either level 9 or Lucian 3. Adding all of these factors together, it should be clear as to why Lucian Sentinel is the most consistent composition in the meta. That's it for our top 5 compositions of patch 11.19. But before we go, we have a few honorable mentions to talk about. First, we have to acknowledge the presence of Hellion reroll in the meta. This composition isn't likely to win games, but if you hit 3-star champions quick enough, you can definitely top 4. The bonus of running Hellion reroll is that there are 3 viable carries for the comp. Ziggs is likely the best, but Kled is right behind him, followed by Tristana. Overall, it's not the strongest composition in the meta, but for anyone still wanting to flex their reroll muscle, it's the composition to play for. Next up is the two 3-cost carries in the meta, Riven and Yasuo. Both of these champions can be played as the main carry by 3-starring them, just far less potent than they were in previous patches. Riven works particularly well since he uses AD items, meaning you could always pivot into a different AD comp, or even Karma Dawnbringer if you have components for AP items. Yasuo is difficult to pivot out of, but spikes during stage 4 and 5 depending on when you hit Yasuo 3. The best pivot is likely Aphelios, as Yasuo is mainly played with Nightbringer, though the items don't work well when transferred. The value of Yasuo is his true damage, which helps against compositions like Knight Legionnaire or Sentinel. But as we said, neither Yasuo nor Riven will do all that well in the late game, so only play them when you're in a really good position to quickly hit their 3-star power spike. That's all for today's video, folks. It's great to see this much diversity in the meta after a bit of a rough patch recently. There's a ton of viable compositions ranging from reroll to late game 5-cost carries, though there's certainly more of an emphasis on 4-cost champions. The only downside is that Jax is feeling a bit left out, but no meta is perfect. Let us know in the comments section below what compositions you've been climbing the most with. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.